35. It's hard to believe I'm all the way in. I mean, so how many, what number is this? It's only less than 94. Seems like I've been doing this forever. It's been, well, we're coming up on 2 years, I think. Yeah. We didn't have any kids in the service. No. So, I mean, it's been good for me. It's been a real challenging book. Job is a challenging book. Some of the things I've learned from it have really helped me. And you know that one verse there where it says that God declares the end from the beginning? He could have said the beginning from the end, but he didn't. He said the end from the beginning. And yet the first book in the Bible written is Job, and it's about the end. So the first words ever penned, the Bible words penned, was the book of Job. It wasn't 300 years later before Moses pens Genesis. The end from the beginning. And that's what we're seeing. This is all about the end. It's all about the tribulation, the Antichrist, the restoration of Israel. That's what this book is teaching in type. And we saw that Job, it said that Job continued his parable. And just remember what a parable is something parallel. It's teaching a truth. The parables that Jesus Christ gave teach an actual truth. And your Old Testament is a parable of the New. Everything in it is a picture of something spiritually that took place in the New Testament. Like the circumcision, now it's a spiritual circumcision. You have a baptism where they went through the Red Sea. Now we immerse people in water after they're saved as a profession of their faith. So you have all those pictures and types and everything, and it's just a parable. And Job is a parable of the 42 months of great tribulation. And of course, he is a type of the Jewish remnant that is going through that time frame. So we're in chapter 35, and Elihu is the young man he's been grilling him for almost, I think this is the 4th chapter. We're going to try to cover this chapter tonight. There's only 16 verses. I know that sounds impossible for me, but I hope to get through it. But Elihu is a young man that you don't even know he's there till he speaks up. He's also the author of the book. And when he comes back with Job in chapter 35, Job's not answered him a word. He refuses to speak with Elihu. Nobody's acknowledging Elihu. Not even God acknowledges Elihu. That's the cost of being young. And there may be some other reasons, but I haven't quite figured out. There's a couple things I want to figure out. Number one is, who do the 3 men, the 3 friends, represent in the tribulation? And who does Elihu represent? Because I don't know. I know who Job represents. You know, and I mean, Job had 10 children that perished. What do they represent? Because everything is a picture of something else. And I just like to figure that out before I get to the end of the book. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But Elihu is now speaking again, and he's acting like a prosecuting attorney. He remembers everything Job said. Maybe that's the reason why God chose him to be the author. I think it's supernatural. He brings everything back to his remembrance, word for word, every conversation. But Elihu is now taking the things that Job has already said, and he's just picking, and then he's picking at him with it and accusing him with his own words. You know what they tell you when you're arrested? Don't say anything. You know, they say, well, I just want to give my side of it. Don't say anything without a lawyer. Why? You're probably going to say too much. Especially if you've got adrenaline running. I mean, if it was a confrontation of some sort, hopefully not a deadly one, but if it was, you know what they tell you? Don't say anything. Give them your name and say, and you say, what do you tell them? You say, I am so upset, I've got to calm down. Give me time. After I've talked to my lawyer, I'll talk to you. Because you get to adding things or exaggerating and just your attitude and everything is different after you calm down. So that's good. It'd have been good for Job if he hadn't said so much. It might have been good for, as far as the end is concerned, it'd have been good for his friends had they not said so much. So here we go. Chapter 35, starting in verse 1. Elihu spake moreover and said, thinkest thou this to be right, that thou sayest, my righteousness is more than God's? What a thing to say to him. For thou sayest, what advantage will it be unto thee? And what profit shall I have if I be cleansed from my sin? Job's saying, so what if he cleanses me from my sin? So what if I'm saved? What has it profited me? Look where it's gotten me. And he says, when he says that thing about my righteousness is more than God's, Job didn't really say it that way. He didn't really say that. But that's not what we need to ask ourselves, is did he imply that? And we've as we've been reading through these chapters, it kind of goes back and forth. Where Job says one thing that sounds like he's admitting that he's just a man. But then on the other hand, he says, look, I was done wrong. But done wrong by who? And the implication is he was done wrong by God. So Elihu starts picking at his words and accusing him. Look at Job chapter 9, because we've got to go back and look at some of the things Job said. Job chapter 9, look at verse 29 to 31. Job says this, if I be wicked, why then labor I in vain? I mean, what does it profit me that I'm doing all these things for God and doing things right and being an honest man? What good does it do me if I'm laboring in vain? What good is it? If I wash myself with snow water and make my hands never so clean, yet shalt thou plunge me in the ditch, and mine own clothes shall pour me. Well, who's he talking to? He's talking to God. He said, I try to keep myself clean. What do? You throw me down the ditch. Get me all dirty. And look in chapter 21. Job 21:15. It says, what is the Almighty that we should serve him, and what profit should we have if we pray unto him? Now, I'm telling you, when we start going through, Job is angry. I mean, he is really angry. He has just lost 10 children, and that's the reason why I say that, I'm not going to be the one to cast stones in that glass house. I have never lost 10 children. I wouldn't even want to be able to imagine that kind of loss. And then to have a wife abandon you, and then to have all of your material wealth stolen or burned or taken out with a tornado. I mean, what do you do with all that? So I'm going to give Job as much room as he needs to vent, and he does, and he accuses God. Now, do I think that's right? No. But am I in Job's shoes? No, I'm not, and I don't ever want to be in his shoes. So look at Job 19. Turn back a chapter. Look at verse 6 and 7. It says, know now that God hath overthrown me and hath compassed me with his net. Now look what he says. Behold, I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there is no judgment. What wrong is he talking about? Well, it wasn't his 3 friends that did this to him, and it wasn't Elihu that did it to him. It was God that did it to him. He said, well, the devil did it. Yeah, but God brought it up. Hast thou considered my servant Job? You just hope that God doesn't bring up your name to the devil, right? But God's the one that brought the thing up. God brought this on Job. And he's angry, and he's accusing. So when Elihu says, when he says, thou sayest, my righteousness is more than God's, Job's implying it. Because I was done wrong, and I was done wrong by you. Now, Job does speak of repentance, if you will, but it lacks sincerity. And that's why I say we've kind of went back and forth a little bit here as we've been reading. Job chapter 7, verse 17 to 21. And you can just, by reading it, you can tell, he's not as sincere as you might think. He says there, what is man that thou shouldest magnify him, and thou shouldest set thine heart upon him? In other words, what's God's fascination with man, the creature? I mean, he's willing to come down here and die on a cross for you. God is taken with man. Whatever was taken from him in the garden, stolen from him in the garden by deception, he wants it back. And he was willing to go to great extremes to do that. It says in verse 18, that thou shouldest visit him every morning and try him every moment, How long wilt thou not depart from me, nor let me alone till I can swallow down my spittle? I mean, he's telling God, just leave me alone so I can swallow my own spit, will you? Just let up, lighten up, go away, leave me alone. That's what he's saying. Then he says, I have sinned. I have sinned. What shall I do unto thee, O thou preserver of men? Why hast thou set me as a mark against thee, so that I am a burden to myself? And why dost thou not pardon my transgression, and take away mine iniquity? For now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be. So he's kind of admitting his frailty and that he's not. Job doesn't believe he's sinless, but yet he doesn't really believe he's that kind of sinner, or he has done something to provoke this kind of thing to happen to him. And you and I both know from the very beginning he hadn't done anything to provoke. God usually blesses men like him. They're not sinless, but he said he was a perfect man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. That's not a perfectly sinless man, but it is a mature man that understands his relationship to God and does according to his conscience and according to the Scriptures. You can't ask for a better man than that. We're just not capable of being sinless, and neither is Job. And remember what Job said in Job chapter 2, verse 3. He said, "The Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity." Now there was his downfall. "Although thou movest me against him to destroy him," what? "Without cause." Now, it's not that God couldn't find a reason. If we're all sinners, we all deserve the judgment of God. We've all violated God's commandments. He could find a reason. But normally, under these conditions, a man that is doing the best he can with what he has and the knowledge that he has, God blesses a man like that. But in this case, he picks Job out of all these folks and says, him. And the devil says, "Challenge accepted." And Job's like, huh? Can you imagine what was going on, man? I mean, the Lord just picks him out and said, that's the guy right there. You and I both know that there's the application of this is the Jewish remnant. And they have something, but they lack something. I think I'm going to get into that a little bit later on in this lesson. But turn to Job chapter 40, verse 8. Now we're going beyond where we are. And the Lord agrees with Elihu, at least on one of the points he does. Job chapter 40, verse 8. He says, "Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me that thou mayest be righteous?" I mean, that's the Lord talking to Job. So the Lord said just about the same thing that Elihu says. Elihu says, you said your righteousness is more than God's. You've condemned God and justified yourself. Isn't that something? How a person gets saved is they condemn themselves and justify God. Just the opposite of what it should be. Israel will never be justified until they condemn themselves. They must realize they may have some personal righteousness, but they do not have the righteousness of God. Job is probably better than anybody you have ever met. He is probably a man of such character and integrity that we have probably never met such a man in our lifetimes. And yet God says, you've come short. And that is, well, I'll get that in a second. Anyway, so God says, I'm thinking of the verse in Job 2:3, destroying him without a cause. It does not say that God was wrong to punish Job, but under normal circumstances, God blesses a man like Job. The issue is not a sin of commission, but a sin of omission. That generation of Jews who go through the Great Tribulation is not that generation that crucified their Messiah. Would you agree with that? Okay. Yet they suffer greatly because of what they do not have. And what they do not have is the testimony of Jesus Christ. They have the law of Moses. They're even singing the Song of Moses, but not the Song of the Lamb. They need both. Job has got some personal righteousness according to the law or the scriptures or the statutes or whatever, but he does not have that testimony that he needs of God's righteousness. And that's the situation with Israel in the tribulation. If you've ever kind of studied a little bit about Jews and how they live, they do live fairly righteous lives. Now, if you ever try to go into business with one of them, look out. I'm going to tell you right now. You'll wind up like Laban did. You'll wind up with speckled and sick sheep and goats. In a business transaction, you're going to get the short end of the stick, so you've been forewarned. But when it comes to family, when it comes to tradition, when it comes to morality, many of the Jews, now I'm talking about the Jews that believe, I'm not talking about the unbelievers over there, the ones that still believe that Old Testament. They live pretty moral lives. And Job's living a very moral life. Look in verse 4 and 5. He says, "For I will answer thee, and thy companions with thee." Now he's going to answer the accusation he just made against Job. "Look into the heavens and see, and behold the clouds which are higher than thou." And that is that God is higher than man both positionally and morally. I always talk about the big picture, And this is what we're going to see is that God answers Job by asking him a bunch of questions he can't answer. Why? Because you don't know the big picture. I don't know the big picture. If you tell me, well, this happened in my life, what do? I say, I don't know, man. I can't see the big picture. But I know God sees it. All that's happened in the last 6,000 years, and even before that, God knew it was going to happen. And He's allowed certain things to happen that I couldn't possibly give you an answer for now. I don't know. But He has an answer. And in Job's case, he's like, what in the world? Why did you let this happen to me? Well, Job, and the Lord may have said, well, I needed you to be a picture and a representation of a group of people in the future that you're going to be a great help to. I needed you to go through this so I could help anyone else going through suffering. I needed you to do this because I wanted to put a stick in the devil's eye. I just wanted to beat him at his own game. There could be 3 million reasons. I don't know. But I know this, God knows. Why? He's in heaven. He's got a lot bigger picture and viewpoint than you and I do. All we do is react. We react to whatever's going on around us, and sometimes we react very badly. He said in Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." What's that tell you? Well, you got to be careful how you accuse God, because when He finally gets a hold of you, guess what? He's going to be drilling you with questions you can't answer that He knows the answer to. And you're going to look like an idiot. You have charged God foolishly. Now, I can say that, but I wouldn't have said it to Job. I just wouldn't have. He says there in verse 6, if thou sinnest, what doest thou against him? Or if thy transgressions be multiplied, what doest thou unto him? You know, God is immune from actual injury, whether a man lives right or not. How does it hurt him? If a man commits adultery, he may destroy a family. He may even get himself killed as a result of that sin. But how did it harm God? Did he suffer any physical injury? Did he suffer any real loss? He's kind of immune from it. So he says, if thou sinnest, what doest thou against him? In Job 34:33, if you want to turn there. Job 34:33. You see, that was the, we talked about this before, that was the argument that Satan had, or that Job had against God, that Satan uses, in that, what do you know about life? What do you know about being human? I mean, God is life, but what does He know about being a human being? What does He know about sin? What does He know about suffering? Well, he answered all those questions because he came down here and dwelt among men and he bore their sins. And that qualifies him as now an expert. But in Job 34:33, remember Elihu said this, should it be according to thy mind? In other words, you think this thing's good. And that's really a tremendous verse because I accuse most Christians of being delusional in the first place. They're delusional. They think that this universe evolves around them. They think that they're God somehow. And that God is like them. He is in their image. It's so far from the truth. God is like nobody you've ever met. And when you don't give this book the proper respect and God the proper worship that He requires, you're delusional. And you're just living out some fantasy. It's going to come to an abrupt end. Now, I'm not saying you're lost and going to hell, but what I'm saying is, if you're going to please God, well, you better find out what He wants, and you better find out what He likes and what He dislikes. And it's all in that book. And He said to him, should it be according to thy mind? He will recompense it, whether thou refuse or whether thou choose, and not I, and therefore speak what thou knowest. Life says, it ain't going to be me, it ain't going to be you. What you think, what I think doesn't matter. God's going to choose whether you accept it or refuse it. So make up your mind. So what do you know? And that's kind of insulting because it didn't matter what Job knew. If thou sinnest, what doest thou against them? And if thy transgressions be multiplied, what doest thou unto him? Well, nothing really. But you know what? I'm finding there's an exception, a minor exception to all of these things, at least a few of them that he brings up. When God's will is thwarted, it displeases Him. Okay? When people do things that you don't want them to do, it displeases you, right? When men do things that God doesn't want them to do, it displeases Him. We were created what? For His what? His pleasure. Revelation 4:11. That's why we exist, for His pleasure. But yet, we do things that displease Him. Men do things. So, if thou sinnest, what dost thou against him? Well, you displease him. That's one thing. Let me give you a couple verses. 1 Timothy 2:4 says this, who will have all men to be saved and to come unto the knowledge of the truth. That's the will of God, that every man and woman that ever walked on this earth be saved. He said that all men would be saved. Do they? No. As a matter of fact, he says, broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be that go in thereat. God is not pleased with that. That shows you Calvin didn't know what he's talking about. People have free will. If Calvin's God always pleases himself, that everything is for his pleasure. Well, he just says that he's not pleased. That he's not pleased with men that thwart his will. Philippians 2:13. For it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of His good pleasure. So a Christian has God within him leading you. Do you always do it? Yeah, you wish. So sometimes we displease God. We don't do His will. Ezekiel 33:11 says, Say unto them, as I live, saith the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn ye from your evil ways. For why will ye die, O house of Israel? He said, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. Well, that means that when men do things that are wrong, the effect it has on God, it doesn't harm Him in that sense, but it does displease Him. He says they'll take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but it certainly happens. And they certainly perish. All right, verse 7. If thou be righteous, what givest thou him? Or what receiveth he of thine hand? Okay, no man can give God anything that would profit him, for he is the author of all life and gifts. Turn to Romans 11:36. But I'll give you an exception to that. A small one. I was talking the other, about a week ago, I don't know if it was last Sunday or Sunday before, I was talking about crowns, that there's one thing you can give God, and that's a crown. That's the only thing physically that you and I will ever have an opportunity to give Jesus Christ. We cannot minister him physically. He's no longer here. We can't be like Mary that anointed his head with that precious ointment, or Martha that cooked him meals, or the ladies that helped take care of him, probably washed his clothes. We can't do anything physically for him, but there's a crown that you can give him. But the reason you're casting that crown at his feet is because he saved you. You never would have got it if he hadn't saved you. And then he gave you the gifts and the ability to earn that crown, right? But there is one other thing. But first, let's read this verse. Romans 11:36. For of him, and through him, and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. Here it is, man. Whatever good comes out of this, whatever good comes out of your life, you can thank God for it. He gave you the ability. The Bible says, if any man minister, let him minister as of the ability which God giveth. I'm just ministering with the ability that God gives me, nothing more, nothing less, or try to be nothing less. But think about this: there is one thing that we can give him that he desires, that's pleasing to him, and that's glory. In 2 Corinthians 9:13, and I need to turn there. 2 Corinthians 9:13. It says, whiles by the experiment of this ministration they glorify God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ, and for your liberal distribution unto them and unto all men. What you're going to find out if you look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9, giving and sacrificing glorifies God. When you give to the poor thank God because somebody helped them, okay? And then you're glorified because, or you're accepted because you gave it. You're the one that gave the sacrifice. And you glorify God for being able to do it, being able to give. So God gets glory from a lot of things that we do. So he says, if thou be righteous, what givest thou him? And what receiveth he of thine hand? Well, one of them is glory. So I pick this small exception, but in the real sense, God created everything, made everything possible, so it's certainly not without him. That's why he says, no flesh shall glory in his presence. All right, look at verse 9, and we're going to read to verse 12. It says, by reason of the multitude of oppressions, they make the oppressed to cry. They cry out by reason of the arm of the mighty. But none saith, where is God my maker, who giveth songs in the night, who teacheth us more than the beasts of the earth, and maketh us wiser than the fowls of heaven, where they cry, but none giveth answer, because of the pride of evil men. Now he's referring, talking about wickedness or wicked men, or why they don't turn to God. When bad times come, men will cry out to God because of man's oppression of other men. I'll give you an example of this. Remember 9/11, okay? After 9/11, all the flags came out, praise the Lord, and the churches were full. Till the fear of that oppression passed. And then the churches emptied out again, and many of the flags came down. You see, what was that? Well, it wasn't worship. May have been a fear of the Lord. Okay, may have been a fear of man, but it wasn't true worship, because he says there, but none saith, where is God my maker, who giveth songs in the night. John chapter 4, verse 23 and 24. What God's looking for is true worship. And it's not just the kind because you find yourself in peril or in fear that all of a sudden you fall down before God. But then when the peril and the fear is past, guess what? So are you. You're gone. That's more, I'll tell you what that is. That's damage control is what that is. That's not worship. He said, but the hour cometh and now is when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Now we've defined that before, but quickly. In Romans chapter 8, the Bible says about a Christian that he is not in the flesh. I know we use that expression, I was in the flesh. No, if you're saved, you're not in the flesh. You're in the Spirit. Okay? That's what it says in Romans chapter 8. But that does not mean you're in truth. That's only half of it. God gets you saved, but there's something else. He said, he seeketh such to worship him in spirit and in truth. Just because you're saved and worshiping God doesn't mean you're worshiping in truth. You say, what's truth? Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. So a man that don't have a Bible or believe the Bible or is correcting the Bible is not worshiping God. Well, he's worshiping the way he wants. That's not the true worshiper. He said, in spirit and in truth. And what folks do is they cry out because of the oppression instead of saying, where is God my maker who giveth songs in the night? I was thinking about that. When God gives songs in the night, your head and arms may be fast in the stocks, if you remember who I'm talking about here. Remember Paul and Silas in Acts chapter 16? It says there, who having received such a charge thrust them into the inner prison and made their feet fast in the stocks. And at midnight Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises unto God, and the prisoners heard them. Dr. Ruckman brings this point out about true worship. True worship is, it doesn't matter what God does to you. You still believe him. You still believe him, no matter what he does to you. I mean, here Paul and Silas are they've been mistreated. Now they're in the bottom of a dungeon. Their feet are fast in the stocks. They're probably bent over. You know, they do that. I don't know if how the feet are involved, but anyway, they're in some type of stocks that holds them, and very uncomfortable, very painful, and yet here they are praising God and singing songs. Psalm 119, verse 54 to 56 says, thy statutes have been my songs in the house of my pilgrimage. I have remembered thy name, O Lord, in the night. Remember, this is about tribulation. It's the darkest part of the night, just before the dawn. I have remembered thy name, O Lord, in the night, and have kept thy law. This I had because I kept thy precepts. So, the children of Israel are going to need these songs in the night during the tribulation period. And they're finally going to come around to saying, where's God my maker? Where's God my maker who giveth songs in the night? See, that's ultimately, and listen, once that Jew realizes who his Messiah is, you know, it says they're a stubborn and stiff-necked people. There is nothing that will deter them from glorifying and worshiping Jesus Christ. Once they realize the truth of that, once they accept it, they will go out through the whole world preaching a gospel, a different gospel in the tribulation to the Gentiles. That's what that 144,000 will be commissioned to do. And nothing will deter them from it. Not even, they'll kill them. And it won't stop them. The ones that are alive will keep going. So true worship is loving and praising God no matter what he does to you. Think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. He said, even if God doesn't deliver, we're not going to bow, O king. Think about Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel's still praying. The lions could have ate him, it's possible. Jeremiah finds himself in the pit, and we find with Jeremiah, he didn't take that so well. He kind of quit the ministry there momentarily for a little bit. But the Word of God kind of burned within him, and he came back. And then we have Job here that went through something horrendous. And I think what God does, and he allows us to go through different trials, and they're all trials, they're all tests, and it's to test the level of your faith. Will you believe me while you're going through this? Will you trust me? Will you turn to me? Do you realize the temptation that when something's going wrong to turn to anyone but God? Because you think that there's somebody out there that can help you instead of asking God. Because somehow you think God must be powerless. He can't do anything about this, but he can. And he's here Job's thinking, God's powerless to undo this, but he did undo it. He did undo it at the end. He gave him back twice as much as what he had. And Job should have believed God for it. Now, I'm not going to cast no rocks at Job. There's a lot of things I should have believed God for that I didn't. But I understand that by seeing this. And what Job's companions should not have said, or at least in the spirit of meekness, God's going to say it right to your face. If you think about it, Jesus Christ resigned to do God's will. He said, not my will, but thine be done. And that's that thing where, as a man, he didn't want to go to the cross. As a man, he didn't want to be made sin. Why would he? You'd be crazy if you wanted it. So he asked 3 times that that cup be taken from him. We know what was in that cup. Listen, the agony, it said he was in an agony. He sweat great drops of blood. Nobody laid a hand on him yet. So there's a lot more going on than just that cross. It's that made-to-be sin thing that he doesn't want. But what does he do? Not my will, but thine be done. Can you say that all the time? If you're truly worshiping God, you better start practicing it. All right. When he says there in verse 11, I didn't comment on this, who teacheth us more than the beasts of the earth and maketh us wiser than the fowls of heaven. In other words, man has been given wisdom or the ability to gain it, denied to the beast of the field. Man can, we can reason things. We can read revelation from God, unlike the beast of the field. But ultimately, the reason men don't cry out and the reason they don't call upon God is it's the pride of evil men. We've got a whole world full of them. All right, let's read from verse 13 to verse 16. It says, surely God will not hear vanity, neither will the Almighty regard it. Although thou sayest thou shalt not see him, yet judgment is before him, therefore trust thou in him. But now, because it is not so, he hath visited in his anger, yet he knoweth it not in great extremity. Therefore Job opened his mouth in vain. He multiplieth words without knowledge. All right, verse 13. Surely God will not hear vanity, neither will the Almighty regard it. In other words, God's not always going to tolerate the nonsense that goes on. Within 2 chapters, God answers Job. He's not going to listen to any more talk. Of course, Job said he's done talking, but the Lord then gets in the thing. There's going to be a lot of vain things spoken, and God's he's going to shut the mouth of men. He said that they all, how's that verse go in Romans? That they all might become guilty before God. He's going to shut their mouth. If thou mightest be justified in thy sayings and overcome without our judgment. There's one that says that it talks about shutting their mouth, and I can't think how it goes right now. Verse 14. Although thou sayest thou shalt not see him, yet judgment is before him. Therefore trust thou in him. In other words, Job, I don't know why you think you're not going to see God. You're going to stand before God in judgment. And Elihu's right about that. Hebrews 9:27 says, as it is appointed to men once to die, but after this the judgment. And in Revelation 20, verse 11 to 15, I saw a great white throne, him that sat on it, from whose face the heaven and earth fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. So Job is going to stand before God. He is going to look at him eyeball to eyeball. Everyone is. Everybody's going to some kind of judgment. Maybe we're not going to the great white throne judgment, but we're going to the judgment seat of Christ. That's a guarantee. And he's telling him that. Although thou sayest thou shalt not see him, yet judgment is before him. You're going to judgment. Verse 15, now there, because it is not so, but now, because it is not so, in other words, the day of judgment, he hath visited in his anger, yet he knoweth it not in great extremity. He is actually telling Job that it's going to be worse when you're standing before him in judgment. I can't deny that, but I'm thinking about Job and what he's just gone through. And it's going to be worse. You say, do you believe that? Oh, I believe it. This is whatever happens to you down here, especially if you're lost, there's going to be greater fireworks. This is nothing compared to what's going to happen at the judgment. Romans 2:5 says this, but after thy hardness and impenitent heart treasureth up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. That's why you should pity them, because they're just storing up wrath. They have no idea what's coming at them. No idea the wrath of God that they're going to face for all of their sins and because of their rejection of Jesus Christ. And then verse 16, therefore doth Job open his mouth in vain, he multiplieth words without knowledge. Yes, it's all true of Job. Yet it was God who chose Job for this and not Elihu or his friends. Elihu? Why not you? Bildad? Why not you? Zophar? How about you? Eliphaz? Why wasn't it you he picked? Why did he pick Job? Now, the things they're saying about Job are true. But the fact that he picked Job and not them, are they saying they're more righteous than Job? I don't think not a one of them could match Job's. We got all he declared his righteousness. Everything from how he treated his servants to being a judge in the gate. And practically flawless. So, think about this for a second. In the tribulation, it's after the Jews flee for their lives. You've got what we call the midst of the week, and it's the midst of the 70th week. It's when the Great Tribulation begins, which is 42 months. A lot happens in that middle. And one of the things that happens is the abomination that maketh desolate, when they realize the Antichrist has put an image in the holy place. It says, ye which in Judea flee into the mountains. They realize, wrong Christ. It's not the Lord's Christ, it's the Antichrist, and we're worshiping this guy. And he just put an idol in the holy place. And if any Jew knows one thing, he knows you don't worship idols. But it's kind of after that, they've already fled into the wilderness, and they're being pursued, and the Antichrist is trying to kill them. But that's when your Bible takes off with all those other judgments. That judgments begin to fall from God. Well, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, Elihu and his three buddies, they're accusing Job, and, Job's going through his trial, but there's judgment coming too for them. This whole world. Well, this whole world, under the Antichrist, tried to persecute that Jew after he rejects the Antichrist as the Christ. He tries to kill all of them. Well, that's when, that's when God's fury goes up into his face. And he says, you gonna go after my people? Watch this. You talk about judgments. Talk about war and earthquakes and famine and the sun being 7 times brighter and all the things that Moses plagued Egypt with in some form or another, even darkness, God's going to plague on this whole world, except for that Jew. And where they're at, he is protecting them and watching over them, that remnant, that's at Selah Petra. So, he says, therefore doth Job open his mouth in vain, he multiplieth words without knowledge. And that's true. But it shouldn't have been Elihu who said it. God has a right to say it, but we don't necessarily. Having been in the ministry for better than 15 years, and then a missionary for 5 years before that, sometimes it's just best not to point out the obvious. because they know. Some folks go through hard times and they make decisions that may have even destroyed half their family or all their family. They know. I don't have to stand there and rub it in. Folks know when they usually make mistakes and everything. And I think if maybe if these three friends had just been a little kinder about it, just a little bit more understanding about it, a little bit more consolatory about it, to console Job instead of accusing. But right off the bat, they're accusing. And, well, we're going to see that the Lord's going to go after Job, but this time it's going to yield something. Job did not respond to the three men and did not respond to Elihu, but he does respond to God. And sometimes you just have to let God deal with the individual. They won't take it from you, but they'll take it from him. Okay? All right. Best I can do with that chapter. Okay. Anybody got a comment or a better understanding? All right. We got 2 more chapters with Elihu, and then we get to look and see what the Lord has to say about it.